Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 11 of the Religious Education Initiative. This is year 2, and we begin, of course, with day 1. We're continuing our way through the book of Genesis. Now, last week we saw Noah's son Ham take a turn toward evil, taking advantage of his father's weakness to try to seize power and dominion in the world for himself and for his descendants. The next chapter in Genesis, which is chapter 10, we're not going to read. It's just the genealogy. It gives the initial genealogy from Noah and lists the 70 nations that were known to the Israelites and where they came from. This genealogy gives the general background for how the different peoples of the world came to be. What follows, what we're going to read today, explains why they went their separate ways instead of all living together as a single people. Now, there is an icon included here below. You'll find it on the website. And this shows the scene at the Tower of Babel. We're also including a couple links below the reading that explain some more about what's actually happening here for those who are interested. What's important before we read this is to understand there's more going on here than is obvious in the text. We have to understand a little bit of the background from the ancient Near East, stuff that would have just been known and assumed and understood, but doesn't jump out at us. Now, with that, we'll read in chapter 11. This is verses 1 through 10, and then we're going to skip through another bit of genealogy to chapter 26, or verse 26 of chapter 11. So, chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. Now, the whole earth had one language and few words, and as men migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. And then we continue with the descendants of Shem, Noah's second son, as it seems. These are the descendants of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arpachshad, 2 years after the flood. Arpachshad fathered Shelah, who fathered Eber, who fathered Peleg, in whose days the earth was divided at Babel, who fathered Reu, who fathered Serug, who fathered Nahor, who fathered Terah. And when Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, if we're not really paying attention, we might think this is about as dry and boring a reading as we've ever seen. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to us off the bat. But there's more going on, like we said. So, first of all, let's go back a little bit. What we didn't read in chapter 10, it talks a little bit about the descendants of Ham. And it says that Ham's grandson was a man named Nimrod. It says he was the first on earth to become a mighty warrior. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, and Akkad, all of them in the land of Shinar. So this is a little bit more background that we kind of need to understand what's going on. This Nimrod is understood in the biblical texts and in the patristic tradition. Nimrod is understood to be a giant, not like he's actually large, but the same as the Nephilim, the giants that we saw before the flood. This is the fruit, the result of Ham's sin, of his desire to take power. This grandson of his, this Nimrod, is an evil, dominating, strong man who preys on the weak and is ruling by force. You know, the peoples, all of them who are, they're all his relatives, all his cousins, and even his nearer relatives. And then he is the one who, at Babel, decides to build this tower. Now, the goal of building this tower is to make a place that God will have to come down. They're trying to control God. Now, they're learning this from the pagan gods. This is the idea. But God sees them, and he sees that what Nimrod is doing, he's building this empire with apparently divine favor. Not actually the favor of God, but the favor of fallen angels still are here, and Nimrod is pursuing this and building up this evil once again. Now, God isn't going to destroy the world, even though it's giving itself over to sinfulness. So instead, to prevent them from growing in evil, this is why he divides the languages and divides the nations. He divides that united power that they had been using for empire, for domination of others, for conquest, and he breaks them up into smaller groups and breaks them up into other languages so that they cannot abound in evil. So this is the mercy of God. Instead of just letting them do what they want and build themselves up to utter destruction, he weakens them. He divides the nations. And he doesn't just divide them, he gives them over. He places angels who are surrounding him and part of his divine council. He assigns angels to lead these peoples. This doesn't go well, however. Many of these, as it seems, all of these, end up accepting the worship. Because all these people who had been Nimrod's people, they still know. They're still trying to worship spiritual beings. They're still trying to invoke demons. And they end up worshiping these angels. And the angels fall, they accept the worship, and they become the demon gods, the fallen angels who are gods of the nations. This is really the background story in the Bible for why all of the nations have their own language, have their own gods, and why they're always fighting against one another. Everyone is trying to get back that power of Nimrod, but fortunately, none of them are strong enough to actually accomplish this for a very long time. Some nations grow strong, though. Where Nimrod had ruled in Mesopotamia, there grow up several empires who go back and forth, but they're limited only to that area between the two rivers. In Egypt, there grows up a large and powerful nation under the pharaohs, and not just under the pharaohs, but under the demon gods of Egypt. We're going to see a lot of them in the weeks to come as we finish with this and move forward on to the book of Exodus. But for now, what we need to understand, this is where the nations come from. And God doesn't choose any of these nations to be his own special people. He calls a man to leave these nations and to follow God and to abandon his identity, to cling only to God. And he says, if you leave your land, your homeland, and you leave your father's house, I will make you the father of many nations. This is where Abram comes from, who becomes Abraham. This is his backstory. He comes out of a nation of evildoers. He comes out of a nation of rebels against God, humans who once again have united themselves with the demons in their rebellion against God. But God calls Abraham out, and he begins to prepare for himself a people through whom he will call all the nations back to him. We'll read a little bit more about this on day 2. For now, I should end just by saying the details of this, historians will argue about, at length. They'll say it's not possible that all of the nations could have come from this place at this time. The details aren't nearly as important as all of the particulars. That human beings built high towers and used them to try to control the gods, this is just what paganism was. There's no question this is what happened. That the nations were divided by the language, this is again unquestioned. This is what makes one nation different from another. Then and even now, this is how we identify, who is a Greek, who speaks the Greek language, who is an American, who speaks in the way that we expect people to speak, and so forth. These are the markers of a nation, especially before Christ comes, though. Different languages, different gods. And then everything is changed by God, who calls the people back to worship only the one true God. And this begins with Abram being called out of this nation of evildoers, called to leave and to be faithful to the one true God. So, there's a lot going on here with the Tower of Babel. It's actually quite exciting, quite interesting, quite fascinating to dig into all of this. I urge you to look at the icon, because you see a representation of all these different nations wearing different traditional clothing, all of them with an angel going along with them. But if we ever wonder what is the origin of Zeus, or any of the other, lead gods of the different nations, this is where they come from. They're angels that God entrusted these nations to, and then those angels fell and accepted human worship and joined in the rebellion of others against God. So, this is the state of the world. Now we're going to see what God does to fix it. So, God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening.